Is this the most studied rook endgame in the history of chess? It might well be. It's certainly the most studied rook endgame by me in my last 2 weeks. I've spent a long time on this position, a long time looking through the Dvoretsky endgame manual on this position and various other positions that are quite similar to it. I've just put together a 56-minute video, which is actually a summary of 5 sections of Dvoretsky that were in turn already a summary of just years and years of analysis on this position. And we didn't even get around to looking at any games, which is what this video is going to be about. We just got 3 games we can look at and just say, okay, that's all the theory, but how did these grandmasters get on in these games? And sort of predictably, because it's in the tragicomedy section of Dvoretsky's endgame manual, we're going to see all sorts of mistakes being made and what white should have done instead, what black should have done instead, etc., etc. And hopefully it's instructive to look at it. I'm not going to go through every single variation, but I'm going to go through some bits that I sort of found useful in those games. So, I mean, a brief sort of reminder of the conclusion of all of it is that white's only winning try here is you've got to try and move your king across, either to defend the a pawn or interference is actually white's main winning plan. King d4, you've got to do it when your rook's on a7, and indeed after king d4. If black takes on f2 with their rook, then that would actually lead to a loss. So black shouldn't do that. Black should instead play g5, and then after that, depending on whether white plays king d5 or king c5, there are different drawing ideas available to black. Some of them lose against king c5 and draw against king d5 and vice versa, but the one that works against both is g4. So that's probably the route I would go down. If it's black to move, we finished the last video by concluding that if it's black to move, I mean, black would have different drawing moves. G5 straight away would be a drawing move. But for me, the clearest way to do it is this rook a4. Just cut off the white king. White's only real way to make progress is to bring their king over to either do interference ideas or eventually make contact with the a pawn to free up the white rook. I mean, the general dynamic that's going on, and is still going on in this video because we're looking at example games from this most studied rook endgame position in the history of chess. The general dynamic that's going on is that whilst the white king goes over to free up the white rook, black can start nabbing pawns and hopefully end up in a drawn version of rook versus pawn on the king side. That's what's going on. So if you can just sort of cut that out straight away, then yeah, why wouldn't you? And as the white king comes over to hit the black rook, I mean, this is one of the variations that we showed at the end of the last video, and yeah, this is just drawn, basically. That just pushes the h pawn. Drawn. So that's a sort of a ridiculous summary of the summary of the summaries from the last video. Let's start looking at some games and applying some of the same logic from that theory, and also seeing what happened when the grandmasters of the time of these games didn't do what we've concluded in the previous video that we should probably do. So this one's from 2002. It's black to play. Notice that we're already one move ahead as black because white's king's on f3, not e3. So even in this this original position, even if it's white to play in this position, it's objectively drawn. That white king being on f3 would be one move further back, and then if it's black to move, white's kind of lost 2 tempi there. So not a big surprise that in this, if I can get my mouse to go in the right place, in this 2002 game where it's black to move now, yeah, this position should be a draw. And the move that black played was one of the moves that is just a draw. I mean, it also makes sense in terms of it's active king e5. I mean, it makes sense as a move, nothing wrong with it. From a objective what does Stockfish think of it point of view. But although it's got an active king, it's not getting on with the plan for my money. I mean, I'm not arguing that that might be one of the best moves, but it wouldn't be one of the best moves for me because I'm not good enough to follow up that with all the other moves you'd need to follow it up with. I'm quite simple. I need a simple plan, and I would just play this rook a4. Just once again, cut out the white king on the journey they have to make if white's going to make any progress whatsoever in this entire setup, and get active. Okay, I mean, I know king e5 did get active, but this is like, get active with the pawns, push that g pawn, takes. I think we're in the similar sorts of positions to the drawn positions from the last video. It's just black's got a couple of moves ahead. White might try rook a8. Remember, as soon as the black king's kind of busted out into the open, the reluctance to push this pawn has sort of gone, because white's now got, if you like, a winning plan. And the black king's in the open. Black has to be extremely careful, and they have to be even more careful after this king g4. When you play that king g4 move, you're like, whoa, I hope you calculated what's going on after a7. Because now white is threatening rook g8 check, followed by a8 equals queen. And of course, we did calculate it. It's an engine sort of verified line. But yeah, absolutely, white is threatening rook g8 check here, followed by a8 equals queen. So we simply check the hell out of the white king. We clear the f3 square, stick our king on it. I mean, what's white doing there? They've got absolutely nothing. They can't even come and make contact with the a7 pawn, because we'd be able to check the hell out of the white king. We could just do nothing, to be honest, as black. Just keep our rook on the a file, just keep the king sheltered, and we're fine. But even if we end up taking both of white's pawns and losing our rook for the a7 pawn, it's, a king here and this pawn here, it's still going to be enough to draw. It's going to be a drawn version of rook versus pawn. So, I mean, I might be sort of oversimplifying it, and if I tried to play this position against Stockfish, which maybe I should actually do, who knows, I'll get some, a nasty surprise. But it looks to me like rook a4 is just, for someone simple like me, is a simple way to draw this. Anyway, king e5 played. There was a bit of messing around in the game. There was a check, king f6. We're back to where we started, and the player with the black pieces insisted on this king e5 idea. King e3, and now black played rook a3 check, which is the best move. It also seems very sensible to me. It's the move I would play. That doesn't make it the best move, but it's the move I would play for a similar sort of reasoning to before. Like, that white king is now cut off, and that looks to me like to be a good idea. But after the game, the player with the black pieces sort of criticised themselves and said that they should have played f6 here instead. And they shouldn't. Their move rook a3 check was better. f6 is actually now losing for black. And the main reason is it goes back to that incredibly important position from 2 videos ago, where if the white pawn's already gone to the 7th rank, white has 3 winning plans. Plan 1 is sacrifice the a pawn for the swapping of rooks into a winning king and pawn ending. Not relevant. Plan 2 is to exchange the a pawn, which will be on a7, for some of black's king side pawns. Very much relevant, and it's the winning plan. In fact, this sort of position was the demonstration of plan 2 in that video. And there's also a nice little checkmate threat en route, which loads of top players seem to have missed in these positions. So, white could play something like rook a8, sorry. We might see check, king e2. Black king tucks itself on f5, because obviously it doesn't want to get checked, and then a8 equals queen. So f5 seems a sensible place for it. White can just push the pawn to a7 now. And they're going to put their pawn on f3. And then they're going to start... I mean, obviously, if black holds the 3rd rank, they've got to mess about, come and attack the black rook. But the point is that, once the pawn's on a7, the black rook can't leave the a file. So it's just a matter of time before white gets their king to g7. At that point, they can bring their rook out Black has to play rook takes a7. We'd go, I don't know, rook b5 check or whatever, or rook c5 check, wherever you've got your rook out. King goes, and we're going to be mopping up these 2 pawns, all covered like 2 videos ago. And in the middle of that plan, if you've watched that video, you'll hopefully remember that when the white king's on d6 or e7, taking away black's only king square. So if you imagine the white king being on d6, as I get rid of some of these arrows, if the white king was on d6, then this rook c8 move wins on the spot. Okay. Black could try rook a6 check as intermezzo, we just block it. And they can't take the a pawn because this is checkmate, because we've taken away the e6 square away from the black king. Anyway, I mean, I say we're getting sidetracked, but this stuff's just so deep. It's just like another reminder. That's like, oh yeah, if they do that, then they transpose into that thing that we covered 2 videos ago. So, which was a prerequisite for the last video and so on. You know, I mean, I personally feel like I'm building my knowledge, and that's good. But it's, you know, if you're just watching this and haven't seen those other videos, you're just going to be thinking, well, this is just a double Dutch to me. I don't know what he's talking about. I mean, you might be thinking that anyway, to be honest. Thinking, can I have someone else explaining this? Anyway, so f6, not actually a good idea there, because white can go for that winning plan. So yeah, rook a3 check was played. Good move, actually. It was played in the game. King d2, and this is where black strays. This is now just objectively drawn, and what black should do is just get on with pushing the kingside pawns. f5. Okay. What they actually did do, I like to think I would not do this, you know, because it just goes against the thing that I talked about. You want to cut off the white king and get on with pushing the kingside pawns. And playing f5 here is consistent with that. It's sort of almost like a rule that I can follow. Whereas the player with the black piece has played rook a2 check, and now the king's coming forward again, king c3. So I'll come back to that in a sec, but let's look at this this f5 move, because I know white would probably just carry on coming towards the black rook. And this is interesting. Okay, rook endgames, tactical shots, they're always there. You've just always got to keep an eye out for them. King e4 blunders the game away to rook e7 check, and now your king's got to go to the d file. Okay, it can't come to the f file because of this tactical shot. Oops. And in fact, black's lost, because king to the d file will play a7, and black's just made no progress. We've got our rook out from in front of the a pawn, push the a pawn to a7, and by that stage black's meant to have like nabbed the f pawn and come back or something. Is threatening, you know, stuff on the king side with their king and their pawns. A drawn version of rook versus pawn. Their king's even on not even on the king side. So, you know, at the very minimum, white's going to be able to execute plan 2 there, which is sacrifice their a7 pawn, or just swap it rather for some of these pawns over here. It's going to be an easy win. Engine saying plus 4.3, for example, in this position. After king d4 is recommended as the best move for black. Anyway, so not king e4. Keep pushing the f pawn. Attack the rook. Rook a5. Keep coming for the rook. Swap some pawns. Come to g4 with your king. Attack the rook. Defend. As soon as the white king makes contact with the a pawn, the white rook is free. So just start checking the hell out of the white king, and then you can come back to a1 there because it's not in contact with the a6 pawn anymore. Rook a8, king g4. It's a draw. Okay, we're easily going to get a drawn version of rook versus pawn by the time the black rook has been lost for the white a pawn. So yeah, that wasn't played. Rook a2 check was played. King comes forward, and then even here, black can still, not necessarily is objectively drawn, but they've got good drawing chances with f6. Pretty similar to the original position. So if it's white to move, king d4, black must play g5. They must just get on with doing stuff on the king side. Whereas rook takes f2, lost. Okay, that was pretty much half of the last video. So it's a similar sort of idea. Black hasn't got time to take on f2. They should instead play f6, king b3, rook back to a1, rook e7 check. And here black can just play king d6, just attack the rook to force it back to a7, and it might go a bit around in circles. If we don't attack the rook, if we instead play something like king f5, we've allowed the rook out from in front of the pawn, and it's similar to that position I showed a second ago in that we've got the rook out from in front of the a pawn, and black hasn't really got anything to match white's progress. You know, the f pawn's still there, etc. So yeah, g5, and a really good move white can play here is f3. Remember, white's winning plan most of the time is going to be interference, and the black king can't come down to the fourth rank. You know, I mean, for example, if black tried this and thinking, well, come and have your f pawn, it's like, no, you won't. Like, oh, okay, I won't do that then. What does black do? So it's yes, it's not what black wanted. But instead of doing that king f5, if we go king back to d6, rook a7, I mean, I'm just trying to, yeah, I mean, in this position here, I mean, the engine was saying like plus 1.2 a minute ago. It's one of those ones where the engine sort of slowly decided that, oh, maybe it's not one after all. So it looks like black still had drawing chances with f6 there, possibly even drawn position. In fact, I think in the Dvoretsky endgame manual it does say that that would be a way for black can still draw it with f6. In the game, rook takes f2 was played, and now it's a win for white. You might like to pause the video and decide what would you play now as white. In the game, white gave the win away, gave black the draw back with rook b7. What white should play here is rook e7 check. The main point is that when the rook's hit, it doesn't have to go back. Okay, a7. If the black rook comes back to a2, then I mean that's just clearly a win for white there. They've swapped f pawns and made massive progress, and black's just got nowhere there really. However, black can play rook f3 check, where we've got to guard the a3 square, you would think. King b4, and just simply take the rook. I mean, this is better for white, but you know that looks quite hard to win. To be honest, I'd definitely fancy my chances at setting up some sort of fortress there as black, or you'd give it a go. I mean, the engine reckons white's winning that, like +2, but yeah. I mean, by the way, this position's better than what white got, because they still should have done that rook e7 check. In the game, rook b7 was played, and black just simply comes back to a2. A pawn got pushed, and this is the bit where black threw the game away. Okay, with king f6. It's a very understandable move. It looks sort of nonsensical, like you want your king on g7 when the white rook is on a8, because you're trying to stop the checks, and if the white king ever goes to make contact with the a pawn, then you can just check the hell out of it from behind. So I mean, this is just lost for black, but we'll see why in a sec. So you can sort of see the logic of it if the white rook was on a8, but the logic of it's not there because the white rook's defending the pawn from the side. So yeah, it wasn't the right idea. The thing that black should have done, this is hard. This is very hard to see because it's a tactical shot that gets them out of jail, and it's a fantastic tactical shot to get them out of jail. I'm reasonably sure that a title player is going to have seen if I play f6. The problem is that white's got this interference idea. King b4. Oh, how does my king escape? Those those checks. I can't come down to the fourth rank because king b3 hits my rook, and then rook b4 check. White's threatening rook b5 check straight away. I don't really want to bring my king this way because I guess white could play. What could white play there against king e6? Just march the king up, king b5. But there's a brilliant tactical shot to draw this, and it's just rook a1. Just give your rook some distance. And white's like, doesn't matter how much distance your rook's got. I'm cutting it off. But this is the beauty of this line. King d4. What's so good about that? Rook a5. Well, this is what's so good about that. The white king's got nowhere to go. It's amazing, isn't it? That's why you need that extra distance. Otherwise, if it was rook b2, king a3 would hit the rook. But this time, king a3. Let's just see it there. You either lose your rook or accept that it's a perpetual check. Come back to b2. I think you've got to be a bit careful with king a4, haven't you? Got to be careful not to lose that. Yeah, you've lost that there, king c4. So I hadn't prepped that bit. It doesn't look good. In fact, how does white get out of being mated next move? And they give up their rook on c5. Fine. But they can always give it up with king a3 as well. Anyway, where were we? So yeah, f6, and that black had a tactical shot to get themselves out of jail. Excuse me. There. So in the game, king f6 was played, and yeah, I mean it's just one for white now. They just marched their king up. Rook back to a1. Black did the thing where they check the king, but the white rook's already on b7, so the king's already got a place to hide on b8. Black thought, oh dear, I'm losing my rook for the a pawn. I'll get active with the king. And white just played rook b4. I mean, they didn't have to. a8 equals queen is a win, but rook b4, and it's black resigned there. Right, next. This is a game from 1980. It is black to play. Pause the video and decide what would you do here as black. So in the game, black played rook a4 check, which is a mistake. Okay. What they should have done, their rook's already pretty well placed on a3. It's hitting these pawns so that when the white king comes over, it might be able to grab one or two of them, get back to a3, and it's a drawn version of rook versus pawn. So this rook a4 check was not a good move. The other thing is that, remember, one of the best things you want to be doing as the defending side is getting an active king. You've got to get an active king. So king f6 was definitely the way forward. I can get the variation to show you. King f6, a6, king e6, king d4, come into f5 with the king. White king comes across, king c4. There's the f pawn nabbed. There's white threatening, or sort of semi-setting up some interference tricks. King b5, king into g4, check. Well, it's not just a case of interference. We're going to be losing our black rook for this a pawn. There it goes, but the white king's just too far away, and it's going to be a draw. In the game, rook a4 check was played, and now it's a win for white. Okay, same stuff, except we're not losing our f pawn straight away, and the black king still isn't active. It's still back on g7. So rook a3, a6. There's the f pawn gone. Rook b8. Rook back to a3, and now we can defend our pawn laterally. Whilst this time it's actually the black king that's cut off, and yeah, that's pretty crucial. Rook takes g3, king c6. This is everything that happened in the game. Rook a3, king b7. Uh-oh, now what does black do? So they're still, their king's still cut off. G5 was played, but they might have instead think to play F6. Doesn't change anything. A7 takes. G pawn gets pushed. We don't take that and allow rook versus 2 pawns. Rook back to b4, and then black's got to sort of bring their king in to help. King b6, but the white king's just coming back. And remember that, I mean, this is rook against 3 pawns now, but once the white king's at the scene, this rook is going to deal with everything very nicely from the side. Rook b5 straight away, in fact, there, and I guess black would have to push their g pawn here, and then king f3. Looks like at least one black pawn is falling after that. Is king f3 the top move? Same rook b7. Oh no, he's just changed his mind. King f3, top move. Yeah, you can see on this. That's checkmate in 28s apparently now. So f6 no good. G5 was played in the game, and this is actually quite a good drawing attempt. We'll see why in a sec if you calculate all the moves down to the rook versus pawn. Yeah, just G5 and just push the H pawn. A7, H3, queen there, H2. I've got to stop that. Rook H6, but then F6. How about that for a clever move? Rook has to take on H2, and then F takes G5, and our king's miles away. Our king is on A8. I keep talking about prerequisite videos for this. You know, not the Vancouver defense video, the Vancouver defense video, the the same version of the previous video that had the pawn on the 7th rank. There was one variation in that video, sorry, where stalemate refuge of a king and pawn ending was a prerequisite. But throughout all of this, rook versus pawns, I did 13 videos on rook versus pawns, and one of them was special features of a knight's pawn. Because if you don't really pay attention to that and just count out moves down to the crucial crossroads position. I did another video, by the way, on rook versus pawns shouldering. That's what we've got going on there. Okay, so black can only draw this with the shouldering, but it is drawn. Here's the crucial crossroads position that we're headed for. There it is. White to play as a win, black to play as a draw. It is black to play it. It is a draw. So king b7 does not cut it because black knows about shouldering and it's a draw. So what do? What are these special features of a knight's pawn? Well, it's that the black king sort of just gets imprisoned onto the side of the board. Rook f2, only winning move. Okay, it's rook f2 is checkmate in 20 according to the engine, and then after that it's just like 0.0 all the way down. Then we bring the king over, and it comes all the way down. It's just that the king can't get out to do shouldering. That's really the main thing that's going on here. That was the game. Black actually resigned in that particular position. So, active king, king f6 was the way forward. I mean, the engine's also got f6 as the best move. I mean, when I'm going through all these positions in the Dvoretsky endgame manual, I'm sort of, also obviously I'm interested in any moves that are getting me the desirable results. If I'm playing black in this position, I'm like, right, yeah, what are the moves I can play to get a draw? But it's not just like, what are those moves? It's like, what are the moves that I understand and can find over the board? And I sort of prefer king f6 from that point of view, because it's like, it's active king. I get that, you know. I want to cut off the white king. It's too late for that. White king's on the 4th rank, my rook's on the 3rd rank. My rook's attacking those f and g pawns. Leave it there. Let's do something else useful. Active king. I mean, I'm sure occasionally I'll get caught out because the king f6 isn't good enough for a draw, and f6 is what you have to play in this particular position because of a nuance later on. But anyway, I'm probably waffling a little bit there. But yeah, I'm looking for moves that I can find, like principles and rules that I can follow. Last but not least, 1999 game. This one is also a black to play. Pause the video and decide. Oh, sorry. One last thing to say actually on that 1980 game is that in the variation that actually happened in the game, was it here? Yeah, this bit here. Yeah, this bit, this cutting off of the king. That was really useful to white in this game, and that just gives me an idea that in this position, for example, as the white side, our pawns it's not a case of like, do we push the pawn from the 6th rank to the 7th? Our pawn's still on A3. So if it's so useful to have the black king cut off, like the advantage of not having our pawn on A6 is we could have our rook there doing that cut off. The disadvantage is our pawn's on A5. It's like 3 squares from being promoted. So I don't know. It's just something to think about. In the only ever competitive game I've had in this sort of position, it was me that had the extra pawn, and that was something I tried to do. I mean, I looked at the moves afterwards, and I made a complete, pig's ear of it, and so did my opponent. But it still worked for me at the time to sort of not push the pawn too far and keep using my rook to cut off the enemy king. It certainly gave my opponent enough trouble for me to win the game. But like I said, I looked at it afterwards, and it was just like, yeah, well, engine says that wasn't well played. Anyway, this position here, black to play. Pause the video. What would you do? So in the game, the player with the black pieces played rook a1, which isn't a great move, and it should be just to activate the king again. King f6. Dvoretsky points out that the player with the black pieces might have been worried about white trying to sort of cement a rook on f4, where it's protected and just, all the pawns and the rook sort of just protect everything, and then after king e6, a4, white can just sort of march their king over to the queen side. But black can easily play f6 and bust that rook off the f4 square whilst also making progress on the king side. And you notice the black king is active. The white pawn still got ages to get to the 4 moves to get to the promotion square. So active king was the way forward. Rook a1, there was a bit of messing about. I think both players obviously just not quite sure what they should be doing. White not wanting to advance their pawn, probably worried about rook a3 check, just trying to force black off the a file, and black just says, well, I'm having none of it, I'm staying on the a file. I think we've gone back to the original position more or less there. And then white just gets on with it, a4. And then black plays the move that white might have been worried about, which is rook a3 check, but it's not a good move. Again, black should just be getting on with the plan of activating things on the king side, just f6, a5, g5, just get on with it, basically. And engine just got that as 0.0 whatever white does. But instead, rook a3 check, king d4. So this rook was doing a useful job of attacking the f pawn, and white wants their king on the queen side. So rook a3 check has just sort of let white achieve that. It's now last chance saloon, sort of, according to Dvoretsky, but even he sort of writes pages on various variations where it's not quite as simple as that. And by last chance saloon in the game, the chance was taken f6, so finally getting active on the king side. But what if black sort of tried to come and nab this f pawn? The better way to do it is rook a2, and rook f3 is objectively lost for black. But my word, there's a lot of only moves that white needs to find. It's a lot more interesting than just saying, oh yeah, it's just lost. So we might see a5, rook takes f2. I mean, check out some of these variations here. Rook c2, come and attack the g pawn. A6, let's have the g pawn, and yeah, the point is that white can now stop the rook getting back to the a file, except they can't because we've got rook g4 check, king c5, rook a4, king b5, rook back to a1. White has only one winning move here. Good luck finding it. It's when I think in the book I can't remember precisely what it says, but it's along the lines of like, oh, rook f3 and it's just lost or something. It's not quite as dismissive as that, but I mean, rook f3, if black just keeps snatching pawns, leads to this position here, which is still a win for white, but they've got to find rook c5. Like, wow. What's the point of that? And the point is, like, if black plays f6, then we can shift the king forward. Again, that's the only winning move, king b6. And just to give you an idea of sort of how hard this is, if black instead plays f5, the only winning move here is now rook c7 check. King f6, pawn goes on to a7, and yeah, I mean, you can see that's very good for white, but very hard to criticise rook f3 back in this position. But rook a2 is a better move, better way of attacking the f pawn, because when white pushes that a pawn, pushes their a pawn, I should say, black doesn't have to take the f pawn. Black can just play f6. I mean, obviously rook takes f2 would transpose, and we've just seen that would then lead to all those variations where white plays rook c6, stops the black rook getting back to the a file, but then has to find that rook c5 move, which is an interference theme that's going to win them the game. Anyway, all of that's irrelevant in a way, because black did find their last chance, f6. Rook a7 check, king h6, and we saw some sensible moves, a5, g5, takes, rook into a4. There was a blunder in there somewhere. Where was it? Yeah, so here black should... the engine's got this as plus 0.4, and black should just play something like rook a2. But it's weird, it's one of those ones where just the engine's just saying plus 1 for taking the h pawn. And as soon as white takes it back, it's changed it to plus 2.5. So tough stuff. I mean, you can see how inactive the black king is in all of this, which obviously makes things very difficult. It was probably too late now. You might be wondering why doesn't black just take the h pawn, having gone to the effort of attacking it. But we'd see rook d7, rook a4, king defend the a pawn, check, king back, but then white can play rook d4 here, and it's all over. So rook a2, rook a8, king g6, king b6. This is how the actual game went. Rook b2 check. There's that coveted shelter of not having pushed the pawn to a7. I'm not going through all of the variations here, but this is just plus 5 now. And it got into a bit of a race situation. We did get into a rook versus pawns, but a winning version for white. It had the entertaining knighting thing going on at the end. King f2, h1 equals knight check. I probably even covered this on one of the this exact position on one of the sort of the rook versus pawns, where it's a rook's pawn. And yeah, I mean, if black didn't have an f pawn and their king was already on h2, they're in trouble there, and then they've lost their knight. But white has to round up the f pawn to make black run out of moves here. So it just finished with king h2, rook g2 check, king h3, rook back to g6, checkmate's being threatened, so rook, king h2, rook takes f6, king g1, rook back to g6 check, and yeah, black resigned because king h2 would just play any old waiting move on the g file. I think I'm predicting rook g8 is a win there. Engine prefers rook g5. Oh, he's got all sorts of moves winning there. So what's wrong with rook g8? Nothing. It likes it. Checkmate in 8, whereas rook g5 is checkmate in 6. Fine. So yeah, active king was the way forward for black there. King f6. Anyway, that's 3 games on the most studied rook endgame in the history of chess, arguably. The titles of these videos are so catchy.